Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We're always grateful to be able to connect with you all. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat, but if you've not joined a service webinar before, my name is Bruce Anthony, and I'm one of the trainers with Service Technologies. Now, before we get started, I want to point out that I have several colleagues on the call today who can answer questions via the chat function. So please feel free to ask away throughout the webinar, and they'll answer your questions directly. And they'll also pass along questions to me that they think would be helpful for the entire group. I also want to note that if you have to leave before you receive a response, our customer support team will reach out to you after the webinar. Now, before we jump right in, I want to make sure you're aware that all of our past webinars are also recorded and have been posted to our YouTube channel, which you can access at video.servicetech.com. And with that, let's get into it. So today we are talking about the opportunity type of service projects. We'll start off by defining our terms, kind of contrasting service projects with events, and then we'll move into some examples and look at some specific use cases for service projects, when they're best employed. And then next we'll address reviewing and approving service project applications. Essentially, how does someone get added into a project to begin contributing? And then we'll take a look at how service project activity can be recorded, both by you and volunteers. And then finally, we're going to overview the service project schedule feature and how that might fit into some of your regular volunteering needs. So to start off, again, let's just kind of define some terms. In service, there are 3 different opportunity types. When you go in to create a new opportunity, you have the ability to select between normal events, time slot events, and service projects. So obviously today we're going to be focusing on service projects, but just quickly, what's the difference here? So with the event types, normal events and time slot events, you are creating something that has a defined shift. So in particular, a normal event is essentially a single shift. Let's say you have some special event happening this Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon. That would essentially be a normal event. You have one shift. Time slot events are sort of an extrapolation of that. You might have multiple shifts occurring within a certain time frame, and volunteers could pick multiple different, pick between multiple different shifts you have available. But again, the idea is that you are creating a structure. You are generating the actual shifts that volunteers are registering for. With service projects, you don't have a specific time that you're creating. There's no time slots. There's no shifts that you're generating. Instead, you have a date range during which this project is considered active. So this could be a particular time frame. Maybe this is only active for the summer. So you might set your date range through here for a particular time frame. Maybe it starts June 1st and ends August 31st. Or this could be something that's kind of ongoing in perpetuity. Maybe you have a volunteer who works with you as an office aide, and they've just kind of committed to doing that through the years. There's not particularly a time frame associated with that. That you could push the end date back in here as far as you want to. And actually under the advanced options at the bottom, you can tell the system not to display those service project dates. This is a setting. By default, service projects will display those dates, but they don't have to. But again, the idea behind a service project is you're not defining shifts per se when people are supposed to sign up. You're creating a space for volunteers to record activity as they engage with you. And how that activity gets recorded, we'll address that in a minute here. I want to talk about some examples. So I kind of threw out a few here already. The example of something like an office aide or someone who's working with you as sort of like an assistant, or maybe an intern where someone's working with you really consistently. A service project can be nice for that because then that person doesn't have to sign up for a shift every single day. Instead, they just record their activity. And again, we'll get into how they record their activity in a minute. But the idea is, you're not having them register for every single day. They're just, logging that information. So something like that where people are working with you really consistently, whether it's in person or not. Service projects can be useful for that. But service projects can also be useful for things where volunteers are operating independently. Maybe you offer some sort of mentoring program or a coaching program where volunteers are just engaging on their own time and then reporting back to you those hours. Likewise, you might have some programming that maybe you've kind of hired a volunteer to do some marketing work for you, or on the street volunteers, doing some kind of guerrilla marketing, things like that. Operating completely independently, and they're just relating back to you those hours. Other examples are things like trail maintenance or park maintenance or grounds maintenance, where again, volunteers are kind of just doing their own thing and then recording their activity as they serve it. So there's a lot of different use cases for service projects, but really the main idea to keep in mind when you're creating these is you are not defining shifts. You're not telling people when and where. You're telling them, you're working on this project and you can record activity. Now, how they record activity is what I want to talk about next. And that's the option right below the dates here, actually. We have this log service project hours option. When you create a service project, this will default to admin only. So you can record hours on behalf of a volunteer, through this project, but they can't actually do this themselves. There are 3 other options in here. You have online, on-site, and both. Online means that volunteers can record activity on their own. They can log into their account, and as long as they're registered for this project, they can just record hours retroactively. So after the fact, they could log in and say, today I worked for 6 hours. Yesterday I worked for 3.5 hours. This is what I did. They can take notes too. But that kind of just lets them record their hours sort of on their own. On-site would require that volunteers use the sign-in console. So the sign-in console, as a quick reminder, is a standalone kiosk that you can set up on any sort of internet-connected device. And this would essentially let people track their hours, kind of like a time card. When they arrive for their shift, they sign in. When they leave, they sign out, and that records how long they were there for that day. So they're not, post-dating hours. They're not retroactively recording information. They're actually doing that on site through the sign-in console. And then both, of course, would enable both of those options. Now we're going to take a look at here what it looks like to record activity on behalf of volunteers. But I want to do that after we've talked about how do you actually get people into a project in the first place? So when you set up a service project, by default, they have basically like an application process where you have to approve volunteers who are interested in that project. So it kind of functions as like a stopgap. You'll see that there's a setting for service projects that says automatically approve service project applications. This is always set to no by default. So normally you do have to manually approve applications for this project. You can forego that process by setting this to yes. But let's take a look at kind of the first use case here. So if this is set to no, which again is the default behavior, when you create a service project, you can still set restrictions on who can apply. Maybe you only take people who are over 18 for this particular role, or maybe they have to have already passed a background check. You can still set those kinds of restrictions on the application itself. But even still, once someone has applied, you have to approve them. So where those applications end up, you can find in 2 different places. On the main dashboard, under Opportunity Management, there's a menu item for reviewing open service project applications. And this just shows you any open application for any service project that's still ongoing. And you can see here, this icon is flashing if you have any applications that you need to review. So if we click into this, you'll be able to see here when someone applied, who it is that applied, what they applied for. And then on the right-hand side, if they added notes on their application, you can see that information. Likewise, if you have custom registration questions turned on for this service project, you will also see the responses to those custom registration questions. And if you haven't used custom registration questions in conjunction with service projects in the past, or haven't thought about this concept, I'd encourage you to think about this a little bit. What it allows you to do is kind of narrow down the exact information that you're looking for in a service project. A lot of times, if you're having people apply for an internship or something where they're operating sort of independently and you want to have a different level of trust with that person, then you might have some other questions that you want to ask that person that your general volunteers don't really need to answer. So you might have some questions you don't want on the general application, but that custom registration questions can be used to sort of bolster what that application represents and what people are giving you. And we talked about custom registration questions in a separate webinar, but just briefly, any event or any project that you've created has the option to include custom registration questions. So you'll see this icon when you're managing your events. And if we look in, for example, at this Reading Mentors project that I have set up, if I click on that icon, I can see which questions are a part of the application process for this particular project. So I can see those questions here, they've been selected, and I can also move those around. So if I want to shuffle the order of the questions or maybe add something else in and move it around, you can do that through here. But with those questions enabled, anybody who applies for this project has to answer those questions now. So when I go in to review open applications, I can see the volunteers' responses to those questions. When I click on that icon, I can see how they responded to those. Now, I mentioned there's two places where you can review open applications. This is one of them. And from here, of course, you can approve or disapprove those applications. When you do so, you can choose whether or not a confirmation message goes immediately to the volunteer, both for approving and disapproving. The language for this email is in your system configuration. So if you want to modify that some, you can. But the other place where you can review open applications on a particular project is exactly where you might think it is, in searching and managing your existing opportunities. If we go into this menu, down through here, if you're looking at a particular project, you'll see, again, we have some flashing icons. That would be if there are any open applications on this project. And if we click on that kind of inbox icon, it allows us to review open applications, again, just for this project. So we're not seeing anything else in this particular context. Now, who can approve applications for a project is any administrators, leadership team, unless they've been restricted to certain things, and then whomever's listed as the organizer on that service project. So all of those individuals have permission to approve applications for a service project. And once someone has been approved for a service project, of course, they'll be added into the project itself, a note's added to their profile. Same thing if you disapprove an application, a note gets added to the volunteer's profile. But once they've been approved, then they'll be able to start recording activity depending on how you've set up that event or set up that project. So again, going back to what we talked about earlier, when you create a service project, so if we go into this Reading Mentors project here, if I go into update the opportunity, through here I can see how it's set to record activity. And I've set this one to both, meaning volunteers can take both sides of the action. They can record hours online, sort of retroactively, or they can record hours on site through the sign-in console. And then no matter what you've selected here, admin can always record activity. So let's take a look at how those actions take place and what that looks like from all those different perspectives. So from the admin side, when you are reviewing a particular service project, you have a dialog option to add or view volunteer or group service project hours. And if we click into this menu, you can, at the top of the page, select any person who is registered for this project. So that person that we just signed up is going to be in this list now, and we can go through and record activity for her. But you can select any person, obviously, who's registered. You can input the date that they served. So again, you can always retroactively log this activity. And then, of course, how many hours. And this is credit hours, so this is always recorded in hours, not in minutes. And then you can also add notes if you'd like to. So you can log that activity through here as an admin. You can review all that recorded activity through here as an admin, both what you have recorded and also what volunteers or other staff members have recorded. This is going to be filtered between two dates, and it's sorted by volunteer name, but you can sort this by the service date or the number of hours. So if you want to go through and sort by, who had the most hours in a single instance, just look for, errors or things like that, you can do that as well. All of these can be modified too. So if we locate one where we realize, this should have been, 2.5 hours instead of 2 hours, you can always go in and adjust activity and then modify it after the fact. So this is recording activity from the admin perspective. From the volunteer perspective, again, there's two ways that they could record activity. One is through the sign-in console. If you have the sign-in console set up, a volunteer could just sign in for a shift and then sign out when they leave, and then that would record how long they were there. The other is if you allow volunteers to record hours online for that project. I'm going to jump over to my volunteer profile, If you didn't know this is an option, when you hover over the profile icon, when you're logged in as an admin, you can switch to view the system as a volunteer. So you can view the system from that perspective as well. And we can see here under registration management, there's an option to record or update service project activity. This will only appear if it's relevant. So volunteers who aren't registered for a service project or aren't registered for a service project that allows hours to be recorded online, they won't see this option. But if we click into this, you can select the individual, you can select which project you want to record activity for, input the date. Again, this is being recorded retroactively, so you couldn't do things in the future. Input the number of credit hours, add some notes, and then log that activity. One thing else I want to mention in conjunction with kind of logging activity like this is that you can also associate impact tracking metrics with service projects. So you can allow volunteers to record that same kind of information. And that, again, can be logged either online or on site through the sign-in console or mobile sign-in. I have that turned on for this particular project. So if someone wanted to record, kind of the stats from that particular instance, they can always log impact. Now, I'm a group leader in my system, so I see a lot of people's entries through here. Most volunteers will only see their own activity. But if you click into log impact here, you can input whatever it is the metrics are that you're looking for. All right, so that's recording activity, kind of how that information is engaged, both from the admin perspective as well as from the volunteer perspective. I didn't really pull up the sign-in console and show the whole sign-in process. We do have a webinar on that topic too, but it's just kind of the same as if the volunteer was signing in for a shift for a normal event or a time slot event. So the last thing that I want to talk about with service projects is a little bit different, and that is service project schedules. What a service project schedule is basically a tool that you can use to forecast engagement with individual volunteers. Perhaps you have a handshake agreement with a specific volunteer that they're going to come in every Tuesday to work on this particular project. Well, what you can do is use service project schedules to kind of build that into your calendar so you can remember that engagement and see who signed up for those different times. This works really well kind of hand in hand with projects that like this office work project, where maybe you want to know kind of generally when you have volunteers, or you might have some people who've been doing this for years, they come in every Thursday. And you want to be able to kind of see that on a calendar so you can contrast that with other people who are interested in this type of project and just kind of slot them in with something that works for you. What a service project schedule is again, it's a forecast. It's not like a time slot that other volunteers can sign up for. It's just a way for you to kind of keep tabs on a handshake agreement you might have with someone. So where you engage this concept is if we go into manage a service project. In the second block of options here, you have the ability to manage service project schedules. And if we click into this, essentially what we can do is build out a schedule for an individual. So at the top of the page here, let's say that Brandon contacted me and that he wants to come in on Wednesday mornings or Wednesday afternoons. I could go in here and set, maybe today is the first day that he's working with me and he wants to come in from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. So I can build in essentially a single instance of this. I can also add notes in here if I'd like to. Again, the idea of this is that I'm creating sort of a forecast for those hours. And then if I want to, let's say he's going to do this every Wednesday through the end of August. What I can do is essentially repeat this in the same way that you might repeat a time slot. So next to each of these entries, you have the option to repeat a scheduled entry. And if we click on that, I can select what days of the week to repeat on. So in my case, if it's just Wednesdays, I would just choose that. You can choose the frequency, so every week. This could be bi-weekly, so every other week, or only the first, second, third, fourth, or last occurrence of the month. But once we've selected that, I can input my start date. We already have one on the 19th, so I'll jump to the 20th, and we said he's going to be here through the end of August. So I can select my kind of date range there, create a repeating schedule, And essentially what this does is builds out a calendar for that particular engagement. So now I see that he's going to be here every Wednesday from 1 to 3 p.m. Now on this screen, we're looking at sort of the forecast of who's planning to be there and, about how long they're planning to be there. If hours have been logged for that day, you'll actually see this icon here. So Brandon's actually already logged hours for today. So that's just noting that he did participate today. It doesn't have to line up exactly with these times. It's just saying that he did in fact come in. So we're just kind of seeing the forecast of this. We can filter this if we want to see particular dates if we'd like to. But really kind of the more useful place to view this information is if we back up to the main opportunity dashboard and click to open this display calendar view. This page will also show us those entries. Now these aren't displayed to anyone else. They're only on the back end of Service. But I can see here now every Wednesday I have Brandon scheduled to come in from 1 to 3 p.m. for office work. And I can see the other entries here too. If I have others who are regulars, those just kind of get displayed alongside that calendar. This calendar, incidentally, can be filtered. So maybe I only want to view the information with the word office in the title. I could filter that, and now this is going to filter what shows up on the actual calendar itself. So if you don't want to see everything, you can do that as well. But this can just kind of help you recognize, okay, I already have someone Wednesday afternoons, so I could probably take someone Wednesday morning or Thursday afternoon or Friday anytime, right? It just kind of gives you an idea of what your schedule looks like. So that's what service project scheduling is. Again, it's a placeholder. It does not automatically attribute those hours. So if Brandon hadn't already recorded hours for today, he's not going to automatically receive 2 credit hours for that entrance today, or for that entry today. He would need to use the sign-in console to record that activity, or record it retroactively, or I could record it on his behalf as well. So that's just kind of a different way to use service projects. It's not something you'll use all the time, but again, those situations where you have sort of handshake agreements with people and want to be able to record those and kind of forecast that engagement, it's a pretty useful tool for building out, especially a calendar view that shows you kind of that activity. All right, so we talked today about kind of all aspects of service projects, from defining them in contrast with events, as well as how they're actually established and how people apply for those projects, as well as how you can approve volunteers for specific service projects. And then, of course, how that information is recorded, once the service project has been established. So if you do have any questions from this topic, or of course, any topic within Service, you're always welcome to use our customer support tool. At the bottom of the page, when you're logged in, click on Need Help. You can type in a topic through here. So let's say you want to learn more about service projects. You could search for that term. We have a lot of articles in here. If you like to learn this way, we do keep these up to date. This is a very useful tool. But no matter what, you can always click on Contact Us and submit a question to our customer support team through here. I want to reiterate that all of our past recorded webinars, I mentioned a couple times the sign-in console webinar, but we've also done one on impact tracking and other concepts throughout the console. All of those are on our YouTube channel. If you go to video.servicetech.com, you can check that out. And I think that's pretty much it for our time here today. So again, if you do have questions, feel free to contact our customer support team. So thanks for sticking with us. It's always a delight to see you in these webinars. And of course, if you have any questions from the content today, feel free to reach out to our support. So I hope you have a great rest of your week.